I don't know about you, but my heart is breaking when we think about the the suffering, the deaths caused by racism, by bias, by prejudice, and including George Floyd's death and Tony McDade, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. So the questions that I'm posing today, and I'm here with questions really more than answers, is, how do we stand in solidarity at this time and move forward in a different way? Um, you know, and how do we heal our broken hearts? I think, that's a song title, and I don't mean to be corny, but I was just feeling even kind of physically shaky this morning. So I invite you to be participating in the chat. This is on Facebook Live, so it will be recorded. I'm unmuting people as they join. And so feel free to write in the chat or to say something, and to know that your voice but not your image will be on Facebook Live. Those of you who are joining by Zoom. So what is on your mind and heart today as we think about all the suffering? And I heard in the Church of the Resurrection's message from Sunday that racism is the other virus. People were already suffering from the pandemic, and we've been suffering due to racism for centuries. And the other quote that really stood out to me was, "Bias can get you killed." And I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother. I just would hate to be raising my children, giving them the talk about what happens when a police officer stops you, and fearing for their lives because of the police. And I know that there are good police out there. I'm not saying this as a blanket statement. I will write this, I think it's in the chat, at least on Facebook later, that there is this website of 75 things that you can do. And I've been doing them. I've been contacting my police department. I've been contacting my federal legislators. And so where are you today? And how do you think that we can get through this? Anyone want to comment? Like a deep sigh and an echo.
Yeah, is there any?
Okay, so if it's echoing, you might have signed in via Facebook, or two different ways, possibly, phone and Facebook. I'm not sure. Okay, whoever it was just muted themselves, so thanks for not disturbing the noise.
Marilyn, I see that person signed in twice. Once is muted and the other one, the mic is open. So there are two sign-ins there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marian.
So
I am part of the International Coach Federation, and they posted their stand yesterday. And it was standing, we stand together against racism, against violence. We stand for greater diversity and inclusion. We stand for respect, dignity, and integrity. So what are you all standing for, and how can we stand in solidarity? Solidarity means unity, standing together, unity, standing with, standing up for. And I find that because I've been speaking out on topics for a number of years now, that it really helps to stand with others, because when I try standing by myself, I'm exhausted. And for me also, that standing with others is more energizing and powerful. So that's something for you to consider, is how are you standing with, how are you standing together with others? How are you taking care of yourselves at this time? Because when we are grieving, when our hearts are broken, it's exhausting.
Marilyn,
Yes.
this is Patty Risch, and I'm in Denver, Colorado. I'd like to share that my daughter has a African-American foster child who's just 2. And she has been in touch with us a lot lately. Lots of conversations around our biases, being born in 1950 and how my parents raised me and how generational it is. And I think it's the steps I'm taking, or we're taking, is lots of conversation and lots of learning and lots of awareness. And we do have biases, even though I think I don't. She said, Mom, you do have biases. And she is very worried about her 2-year-old. And not that he won't grow up and have an Obama mindset, but more of, just the passive kind of aggression that could happen. She also wants to take a stand at the courthouse in Denver, and we offered, she asked us to watch him because they feel, as you said, Marilyn, they want to stand with others as white people, to stand in solidarity. And that's so important to them. So yeah, that's what I think: education, learning, and openness, and facing our own biases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And like you said, Patty, we all grew up with biases, whether we want to admit it or think about it or not. And you and I are in a profession where we're supposed to be judgment-free, and that unfortunately is impossible. But what we can do is learn ways to pause and look at our biases, and having people like your daughter to hold you accountable for that is beautiful, and to call it out when they see it. Even the way I posted for this meeting, I got some pushback from people about how I had posted about it. So, and my daughters have called me out, not in talking about a race or an ethnicity or a gender or a generation, but about an opposing political party, people who believe differently than I do politically. And I wasn't using names, but just the tone of my voice and how I was talking about those people was a way of othering, was a way of distancing from them and possibly seeing them as less than. And so I'm thankful for the accountability that I have in my life, including a close African-American friend, and who we are accountability partners for each other. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
Mhm.
And she does keep me very accountable every word,
Yes.
and I'm
Yeah.
grateful for that.
Mhm. Mhm. What I try to remember, and this scarf was a Christmas present, and it has reminds me of a song from childhood, "All the Little Children of the World," uh, that they're precious. Each one of us I see as a precious creation, and just learning that, seeing that in people, and remembering and trying to treat everyone with respect, how I would want to be treated, how I would want my children to be treated. One of the things that I reached out to the police chief on was, what kind of training are your officers receiving? And I got a very nice response and said they were getting annual training on bias and racism, and that they are getting, trainings on in other circumstances. They wear their body cameras. They're supposed to turn them on for each call. These are things that we can be checking on and letting our voice be heard. Um, and that's part of that standing in solidarity. And the other thing that I try to ask myself, and I have occasionally asked others, even in social media posts. I'm on social media for my business, and not publicly in a comment, but privately, is, how are your words, or how are my words, and pulling us together or tearing us apart? So, my question for this call was, are we really all in this together? I mean, the recent deaths in the US are from centuries of racism. And, we didn't have a lynching law until an anti-lynching law until the 1950s. So it's changing centuries of behavior and mindset and bias and racism. And the image that I chose had these 3D glasses on it. So we can we see things through different cultural lenses, and that impacts how we see other people, our world, different circumstances. And we can do a check-in with ourselves. We can use those accountability partners to help us check in with ourselves on and checking for bias and racism in our words, our behavior, and taking steps then to change that. And I don't know about you, but I'm usually an optimistic person, and my hope really has been challenged recently. And I know in the last few years that the hate crimes have gone up significantly in the US. The number of hate groups have gone up significantly in the US, and not just in the US. So yesterday I was talking with a colleague from Hong Kong. They've been experiencing riots for the past year. And I see these as situations where people are asserting their power over others in dangerous, violent, oppressive ways. And just even thinking back to when I was in college many years ago, a psychology experiment, they don't let them do experiments like this anymore, where they assigned half of the class as prison guards and half the class as prisoners. And I think it was over a weekend. And by the end of the weekend, those who were assigned the roles of the prison guard were oppressing the prisoners. So that tendency that we have when we're in positions of power to exhibit power over, I have power over you, rather than shared power. We have power together, and how can we use that for the greatest good? It's dangerous. So I'm open to other comments at this point. Comments, questions, what's on your mind, what's on your heart?
Marilyn,
Yes.
this is Betty.
Hi, Betty.
A sermon I heard this weekend, I took notes on it because, you know, we keep talking about how we feel
Mhm.
about this, what our feelings are. And the pastor's issue brought that up in the sermon. He said, it's not just about your feelings. What are your doings?
Yeah.
What are your doings? And yet we feel devastated. We feel, you know, the unfairness and all of that. And yet, until we translate that into doings, and so I was interested in your comment about the, is it a website that you said had
Yeah.
75 ways that you might, you know, sometimes you are so flattened that easy responses or things that you can do and to, you know, focus on are very great helps in to pick yourself up off of the floor and try again, because the last thing we can do is lay down or ignore and not respond beyond feelings. So I wanted to ask you about that, and then I have one other thing too.
Yes, I'm putting the website, thanks, in the chat, and it's Equality Includes You, What White People Can Do for Racial Justice. And there are things besides, you know, what white people can do that anyone could do, like contacting the police force.
Sure.
Or contacting your legislator.
Sure.
And the, you know, the message is clear, is that those of us who are white have a responsibility, whether we're policemen or, you know, implicated specifically or not. Just even people picking up their cameras and recording things that they see that are not right. Yeah.
Right. The other thing that I saw this week, being an Iowegian, I certainly was aware of Jane Elliott and her blue eye, brown eye.
Oh, yes.
Experiment, so to speak, in Iowa, in Riceville, Iowa, has a little clip on, and it was less than a minute long, and I did post it on my website, but it looked like a whole meeting of white women, and her question was, or her challenge to the audience was, if you are satisfied with being treated like Black people are treated, please stand up. Of course, nobody stood up. So she went through it again, and she goes, you don't get it. You know, obviously, if you're not willing to stand up and say, that's fine, it's good with me, obviously it's not good for the other people. And so why do you tolerate it? And it was just very, very forthright and in your face. But when confronted with that, if you can't answer and stand up, there is a problem, obviously.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that is very powerful.
Yes.
Mhm.
And it wasn't long, it wasn't a lecture, it was a direct challenge.
And back to this idea of, having feelings is not enough, that we need to take action. And I think it's both, that we do have feelings, certainly not, the same as those being directly impacted. The families that are grieving, but and so not but and we're called to heal, to take time to. That's another thing I think we can do in solidarity is share what we're experiencing and our feelings, and be there for each other in a supportive way, and to understand that the spectrum of grief includes anger and sadness and, calling out and frustration and disappointment and discouragement, and also to take some steps to change the situation. Mhm. The institutionalized racism that we have in the US, and to be aware even of what's happening globally, because there is a rise of nationalism around the globe, and those situations where people have power over others. I want my tribe to be dominant. I want my group to be dominant. And the human rights violations go up. They found that was the United Nations statistics. With the rise of nationalism, human rights violations go up. So any further comments, questions before we close out? Mm-hmm.
It is interesting to me that in happening at this time, typical things that we might do are kind of off the table, with social distancing and giving a hug or shaking a hand or all those kinds of things. So we're being called in new ways to step out in solidarity. And so that's another piece of the puzzle, which is an interesting aspect.
I appreciate that. And I think because we have been sheltering in place, that is kind of like, putting the lid on the anger, and it's maybe making it a little bit worse, that we've spent all this time cooped up. And in the U.S., the rate of African Americans dying, the percentage has been so much higher compared to the percentage of the population, and also women. 2/3 of the low-paying jobs in our country are held by women, and there are also many of them. Those low-paying female jobs are, like cleaning, offices, hospitals, things like that, nurses' aides, and they're essential workers, so they're still working, and they're still the primary caregiver for children at home. And the stress that's on them, when you can't get out and there's domestic violence in the household, then what? I mean, it just complicates, as you say, complicates and exaggerates. And I was on a call with someone recently who lives in the Middle East, and they're used to seeing, this much of the face, the eyes with women. And that's where we all are now. I started to walk in a store the other day for one of the few times in the last few months. And I was starting to smile at the person by the door. And then I said, "Oh, you can't see my smile." It's a different feeling.
Marilyn,
Yeah.
I wanted to, Patty Rich, I wanted it does feel like a pressure cooker. It really does. And my daughter said, when you were referring to the mash, she said, because we lived in Pakistan for a while, and she said, Mom, they're laughing at us now because of our biases when we were there. And I want to loop back to what you said about this being an epidemic or pandemic, because if we zoom out, it really does feel so synchronistic that why have these two major world, like on a global level, events occurred at exactly the same time. And I think the universe is really on another level, just, sending messages that change on many levels needs to happen. And sometimes we don't learn our lessons. So these things happen, and it doesn't take it away from the pain that we feel at the moment when we zoom in. But I just wanted to share how much I really feel it's another kind of a pandemic.
Yeah, thank you. And I've been writing and talking some about, and so have others, about this being a time where the world is breaking open, just like, an acorn buried under the ground breaks open for a tree, a beautiful tree to grow from it. I'm hoping that's what's happening, and that we can do some things to help move this forward, use this time for good, and work for positive change. So I'm going to leave you all with some Desmond Tutu quotes. He was, a bishop in South Africa and helped that country get to where it is, and not that things are totally healed there, but to get to a place of change and healing. So he said, when we see others as the enemy, we risk becoming what we hate. So we don't want to go there. And the second quote, no one should be excluded from our love, our compassion, our concern because of race, gender, faith, ethnicity, or sexual orientation, or, many different categories. Those are key categories, key sexual, not sexual identities, key cultural identities. And we all have a multitude of cultural identities, age and gender, and socioeconomic level, educational level, ethnicity, race, etc. So I want to thank you all so much for being here and participating and contributing. And it's good to feel the solidarity with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Marilyn.
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 Thank you, Marilyn.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.